The snowmobile sputtered to a halt 50 yards from the facility. I killed the engine, and the silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the howl of wind across the ice field. Dr. Richardson had warned me about the isolation of the Alaskan Glacier Research Station, but nothing had prepared me for the sheer emptiness of this place. The facility itself was a low concrete structure half buried in snow, its solar panels nearly invisible beneath a thin layer of frost. My boots crunched through the snow as I approached. The air bit at my exposed skin, temperature hovering at 40 below. Richardson had said this was the best-paying research assistant position in the country, but now I understood why. The debt I carried for my sister's medical treatment had driven me to accept without question. The heavy steel door swung open before I could knock. A man in his late 50s stood there, face weathered by years in this environment. "You're late," he said, checking his watch. "You were scheduled at 1700 hours. Snowmobile trouble," I replied, pulling my duffel inside. "Name's Miller. I've been monitoring this facility for 6 years. Time for me to retire to civilization." He led me down a narrow corridor lit by harsh fluorescent lights. "Your orientation is brief. You'll learn what you need to know from the rules." The facility was smaller than I'd expected, with a monitoring room, a small living quarters, a kitchen, and the hatchery itself, a series of climate-controlled units where ice samples and cryopreserved specimens were stored. Miller stopped at a door marked Monitoring Room. "This is where you'll spend most of your time. Your job is simple. Maintain the specimens, record data, and follow the rules without deviation." He handed me a thick envelope. "This contains everything you need to know. Read it tonight. I leave at dawn tomorrow." "What about training?" I asked. He shook his head. "There's no training, only compliance. The facility has been operating for 23 years. 4 monitors before me. All followed the rules. All survived their shifts." Something in his tone made me uneasy. "Survived?" Miller's eyes met mine. "The glacier is ancient. The specimens are older. They don't like to be disturbed." He checked his watch again. "It's 1800 hours. Time for your first inventory check. The list is on the terminal." He left me alone in the monitoring room. 3 walls of monitors displayed temperature readings, pressure gauges, and live feeds of the specimen units. The 4th wall was a thick window looking into the hatchery, where rows of transparent containers held ice samples that glowed with an eerie blue light. I sat at the terminal and pulled up the inventory list. Salt, iron filings, emergency rations, fuel for the generator, medical supplies, all meticulously counted and recorded. As I worked through the checklist, I noticed the envelope Miller had given me. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 12 numbered rules typed in precise font. 1. Always check the hatchery seals at exactly 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. No exceptions. 2. Never look directly at the specimens between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Use the periscope only. 3. If you hear tapping on the outer walls, count exactly 7 taps. If more or less, initiate lockdown protocol. 4. Never use your name on the radio after 10 p.m. Use designation monitor only. 5. The south window must remain covered between 11:30 p.m. and 4:30 a.m. 6. If the temperature in Sector B drops below -70 degrees Celsius, increase monitoring frequency to every 15 minutes. 7. Never consume food or drink in the monitoring room after midnight. 8. If you see movement in the ice samples, do not acknowledge. Continue observations as normal. 9. The emergency generator must be tested every 3 days, but never on a Tuesday. 10. Never enter the specimen storage area alone. Always have radio contact with base camp. 11. If you hear your name whispered, do not respond. Leave the room immediately and return in exactly 10 minutes. 12. Always maintain an inventory of salt and iron filings. Replenish when below 50% capacity. I frowned at the list. Some rules made practical sense for a remote research facility, but others were peculiar. Why the specific time windows? Why the prohibition on looking at specimens during certain hours? Why the strange protocols about tapping and whispers? I finished the inventory and noted that the salt supply was at 47%, below the recommended threshold. I made a note to replenish it from the storage closet. At 7 p.m. precisely, I performed my first seal check on the hatchery units, running my gloved fingers along the thick rubber seals that kept each container airtight. All seemed secure. When I returned to the monitoring room, Miller was there, holding a steaming mug. Inventory complete? Yes, the salt needs replenishing. He nodded. First rule of thumb, never let the salt run low. The iron filings, too. He gestured to the window. The specimens are stable tonight. Good weather for your first shift. What's in the specimens? I asked. Miller took a sip of his coffee. Ice cores, mostly. Some biological material recovered from deep in the glacier. Prehistoric, possibly older. He set down his mug. Listen carefully. The rules are not suggestions. They're not guidelines. They are the difference between completing your contract and becoming part of the collection. The way he said it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. What happened to the monitor before you? Miller's expression hardened. He broke rule number 11. Heard his name whispered, responded. We found his monitoring station empty 2 days later. All equipment intact, door sealed from the inside, but he was gone. I stared at the list of rules. They seemed less like operational guidelines and more like protective rituals. I've left additional notes in the system, Miller said, standing to leave. Radio checks at 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. Emergency protocols are in the red binder. Don't open unless necessary. One more question, I said. Why Tuesday for the generator? He paused at the door. The geomagnetic readings are always unstable on Tuesdays. Testing the generator during those fluctuations has consequences. He looked at his watch. It's 7:30 p.m. Time for your first sector temperature readings. The procedure is on the terminal. After he left, I sat alone in the monitoring room, the hum of equipment the only sound. Outside, the Arctic night had fallen completely, darkness absolute, except for the faint glow of the facility lights against the snow. I began my duties, recording temperatures, checking pressure gauges, noting any fluctuations in the specimen units. Everything appeared normal, stable. The ice samples remained motionless in their containers, their blue light steady and constant. At 11 p.m., I remembered rule number 5 and went to cover the south window. The heavy curtains slid easily into place, plunging that corner of the room into deeper shadow. When I returned to the monitors, I noticed something odd. The temperature in Sector B had dropped to minus 71 degrees Celsius. I checked the reading twice, then increased the monitoring frequency to every 15 minutes as rule number 6 required. At midnight, I made myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, remembering rule number 7 about not consuming anything in the monitoring room after midnight. As I sipped the bitter coffee, I thought about my sister in the hospital thousands of miles away. This job would pay for her treatment completely, but sitting there in the oppressive silence of the Arctic night, I wondered if the price was higher than I had calculated. When I returned to the monitoring room at 12:15 a.m., I heard a faint tapping sound from the outer wall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 taps, then silence. My heart raced as I remembered rule number 3, exactly 7 taps. The protocol said to continue normal operations if the count was correct, but my hands trembled as I recorded the event in the log. At 2 a.m., I remembered rule number 2 and switched to the periscope for observing the specimens directly. The angled view distorted the containers slightly, but I could still make out the ice samples within. As I watched, I thought I saw something move in one of the deeper blue specimens, a flicker of darkness that might have been a trick of the light or the periscope lens. Rule number 8 echoed in my mind. Do not acknowledge movement. I continued my observations as if nothing had happened. By 4:30 a.m., I was exhausted but relieved that the night was almost over. I uncovered the south window as rule number 5 required, then continued my routine checks. At 7 a.m., I performed the second seal check of my shift. All seals remained secure. When I finished, Miller was waiting for me in the corridor. First night complete, he said, looking me over. You followed the rules? As best I could, I replied. He nodded. Good. That's what matters. He handed me a small device. This is the geomagnetic reader. Check it before testing the generator. Remember, never on a Tuesday. Right. Your contract is for 1 year, Miller said. If you survive, you'll leave here with enough money to solve whatever problems sent you here. He looked toward the hatchery window. If you don't, well, you'll become part of the research. That morning, Miller left on the snowmobile he had arrived on, and I was alone in the facility. The silence that descended was heavier than before, more absolute. I was now the sole monitor of the Glacier research hatchery, responsible for maintaining the ancient specimens and following the 12 rules that someone had left behind. As I prepared for my second night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by Miller or any human presence, but by something ancient and cold that lay dormant in the ice samples behind the thick glass of the hatchery window. The second night passed much like the first, with routine checks and procedures. The tapping on the outer wall returned at exactly the same time, 7 taps precisely. Sector B's temperature again dropped below -70 degrees Celsius. Again, I thought I saw movement in the ice samples, but I followed rule number 8 and did not acknowledge it. On the third night, a storm blew in, reducing visibility outside to near zero. The wind howled against the facility walls, and for the first time, I felt truly isolated, cut off from the world by miles of ice and snow. At 11 p.m., as I covered the south window, I noticed something unusual. A thin layer of frost had formed on the inside of the glass, despite the climate control system. I made a note of it in the log but didn't think much of it until I returned to the monitoring room. The temperature in Sector B had plummeted to -75 degrees Celsius. I increased monitoring frequency to every 15 minutes as required, but as the night progressed, the temperature continued to drop. By 2 a.m., it was at -80 degrees. Using the periscope as rule number 2 required, I observed the specimens. The blue light seemed to pulse slightly, and I was certain now that there was movement within the ice shadows that shifted and reformed when they shouldn't. At 3 a.m., I heard something new. A faint, whispering sound that seemed to come from the hatchery itself. I couldn't make out words, but the sound was unmistakable. Rule number 11 echoed in my mind. If you hear your name whispered, do not respond. Leave the room immediately and return in exactly 10 minutes. The whispering wasn't calling my name, but the proximity to the hatchery made me nervous nonetheless. I decided to take a break from the monitoring room, stepping into the corridor for fresh air. When I returned exactly 10 minutes later, the whispering had stopped, but the temperature in Sector B had dropped another 2 degrees. By morning, I was exhausted and unnerved. The storm continued to rage outside, trapping me in the facility with whatever was happening to the specimens. The fourth night brought more anomalies. The tapping on the outer wall returned, but this time, there were 8 taps. Rule number 3 was clear. If more or less than 7 taps, initiate lockdown protocol. I consulted the red binder Miller had mentioned and found the lockdown procedure. Seal all doors and windows with iron tape, maintain radio silence, and monitor from the safe room until sunrise. I followed the protocol precisely, sealing doors and windows with the iron tape I found in the storage closet. The safe room was a small windowless space behind the monitoring room with its own independent air supply and a single monitor connected to the main system. As I sat in the safe room watching the monitors, I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the specimen units in Sector B was showing signs of rapid thawing, the ice within melting at an alarming rate. I checked the emergency protocols in the red binder. If any specimen shows signs of rapid thawing, evacuate the facility immediately. Do not attempt to save equipment or samples. But evacuation was impossible in the storm. The snowmobile was buried and visibility was zero. I was trapped. As I watched in horror, the specimen continued to thaw and something dark began to take shape within the melting ice. I couldn't make out details, but the form was vaguely humanoid, ancient, and wrong. Then came the whispering again, clearer this time, and I understood why rule number 11 existed. It was calling my name. "Mark," it whispered, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Mark, we know why you're here. Your sister needs you. We can help." I froze, my hand hovering over the radio. Miller had said never to use my name on the radio after 10 p.m., but this was different. This was something else entirely. "Mark," the voice continued, "we've been waiting for someone like you. Someone with a reason to listen. someone who needs what we can offer. I remembered rule number 11. Do not respond. Leave the room immediately and return in exactly 10 minutes. But I was already in the safe room, and leaving would mean crossing the facility to reach another room. The voice seemed to be coming from the monitoring room's speakers now, clear and compelling. We can cure her, Mark. We have knowledge that predates humanity. We can make her well. My heart pounded in my chest. The medical bills had seemed insurmountable, the treatments experimental and expensive. This job was my last resort, but what if there was another way? We've been here longer than the ice, the voice whispered. Longer than the glacier. We remember when the world was young. We can help you if you help us. I glanced at the monitor showing the thawing specimen. The dark form within was more distinct now, and I could see what looked like fingers pressing against the inside of the container. Just open the container, Mark. Just one. We'll show you wonders you can't imagine. We'll give you the cure for what ails your sister. My hand moved toward the control panel that would open the specimen unit. The voice was so convincing, so reasonable. What harm could there be in opening just one container? Then I remembered Miller's words. The rules are not suggestions. They're the difference between completing your contract and becoming part of the collection. I pulled my hand back as if burned. No, I whispered to myself. No. The voice grew angry, the whispering now a hiss. Fool, you'll regret this. We'll be free eventually, and when we are, you'll be the first we claim. The tapping on the walls returned, frantic and irregular, not 7 taps but dozens, then hundreds, as if countless fingers were drumming against the facility from outside. I stayed in the safe room until dawn, when the tapping finally ceased, and the voice fell silent. When I emerged, the specimen unit had somehow refrozen, the dark form within no longer visible. The temperature readings had returned to normal, and the facility seemed stable once more. But as I conducted my morning seal check, I discovered something disturbing. One of the specimen units showed signs of tampering, the seal partially broken. I checked the inventory and found that a small amount of salt and iron filings were missing. That morning, I added my own amendment to the rules, typed carefully and added to Miller's list. 13. Never respond to whispers, no matter what they offer. Seal any compromised specimen unit immediately with salt and iron filings. The 5th night passed without incident, and on the 6th day, the storm finally broke. The sky cleared, revealing the vast expanse of the glacier under a pale sun. I spent the day checking equipment, replenishing supplies, and reviewing the rules. The salt supply was now at 38%, well below the recommended threshold, so I restocked from the storage closet. That night, as I began my routine, I noticed something new in the monitoring room, a small notebook tucked behind the terminal. It was Miller's personal log, something he hadn't mentioned during our brief orientation. I opened it and began to read. The early entries were routine, but as I progressed through the months, I noticed changes. Miller wrote about strange occurrences, anomalies that didn't fit the rules, moments when he felt the facility was testing him, looking for weaknesses. Then I found an entry dated 6 months into his tenure. The rules are not enough. Something has changed. The specimens are becoming more active, more aware. I've added my own amendments, but I fear they won't be sufficient. The tapping has changed. Sometimes it's 6 taps, sometimes 8. The whispering now knows things about me it shouldn't know, things I've never spoken aloud. Further in, I found another entry. I've discovered something in the original research notes. The specimens aren't just biological material preserved in ice. They're something else entirely, something that was imprisoned in the glacier long before humans walked the earth. The scientists who first discovered them didn't understand what they had found. They thought they were studying prehistoric life, but they were actually guarding a prison. The final entry, dated just before my arrival, chilled me to the bone. The specimens are communicating with each other. I've seen it in the temperature fluctuations, in the patterns of light they emit. They're planning something, coordinating their efforts to break free. I've added emergency protocols to the red binder, but I fear they won't be enough. I'm leaving, not because my contract is complete, but because I can feel them getting stronger. The new monitor will face challenges I never had to face. I hope he's stronger than I was. I closed the notebook, my hands shaking. Miller hadn't retired to civilization, he had fled, leaving me to face whatever was coming. That night, the tapping returned. But this time, it was 6 taps. Rule number 3 was specific about 7 taps. But what about 6? The rules didn't say. I decided to follow the lockdown protocol anyway, sealing doors and windows with iron tape and retreating to the safe room. From the safe room, I watched as the temperature in Sector B dropped again, this time to minus 90 degrees Celsius. The blue light of the specimens pulsed in a synchronized rhythm, and I could see movement in multiple containers now, not just one. Then came the whispering, but this time it wasn't calling my name. It was speaking in a language I couldn't understand, ancient and guttural, yet somehow familiar. The voice seemed to be coming from the monitoring room speakers, but also from the walls, the floor, the very air around me. I stayed in the safe room until dawn, when the tapping and whispering finally ceased. When I emerged, I discovered that 2 more specimen units showed signs of tampering, their seals partially broken. I checked the inventory and found more salt and iron filings missing. That morning I added another amendment to the rules. 14. If tapping is not exactly 7 taps, initiate lockdown protocol regardless of count. The 7th night brought the most terrifying experience yet. As I conducted my routine checks, I noticed that the geomagnetic reader was showing unusual fluctuations, far beyond anything I had seen before. The storm had passed, but the geomagnetic activity was intensifying. At 11 p.m., as I covered the south window, I saw something outside, a figure standing in the snow about 50 yards from the facility. It was human-shaped but taller than any person I had ever seen, and it moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the snow rather than walking. I grabbed the binoculars for a closer look, and my blood ran cold. The figure was wearing a parka identical to the one Miller had worn, but its face was wrong, too pale, too smooth, with eyes that glowed with the same blue light as the specimens. I dropped the binoculars and stepped back from the window, my heart racing. The figure outside raised a hand and waved slowly, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the Arctic night. I checked the radio, thinking to contact base camp, but then remembered rule number 10. Never enter the specimen storage area alone. Always have radio contact with base camp. This wasn't the specimen storage area, but the principle seemed the same. If I used the radio, I might be revealing my presence to something I didn't understand. Instead, I consulted Miller's log again, looking for any mention of figures outside the facility. I found an entry dated 3 months into his tenure. I saw it tonight, a figure outside that looked like me but wasn't. It waved and walked away. I didn't mention it in the official log because I didn't want to be dismissed as unstable. But I know what I saw. The specimens are learning, taking on forms that will disarm us, make us question what we know. I added another amendment to the rules. 15. If you see figures outside the facility, do not acknowledge their presence. Seal all windows and maintain radio silence. The 8th night tested my resolve in ways I hadn't expected. The geomagnetic activity continued to intensify and the specimens grew more active. The tapping on the walls was now constant, irregular, and maddening. The whispering had returned, sometimes calling my name, sometimes speaking in that ancient language I couldn't understand. At 2 a.m., as I observed the specimens through the periscope as rule number 2 required, I saw something that defied explanation. One of the specimens was changing shape, forming what looked like letters or symbols in the ice. I couldn't read them, but they seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the blue light. Then came the voice again, but this time it wasn't whispering. It was clear and strong, coming through the speakers as if someone were in the room with me. "Mark," it said, "we know you're afraid. We know you're alone, but we can help each other." I remained silent, remembering rule number 11. "We've been here for eons," the voice continued. "We remember when the world was fire and ice. We remember the birth of life, the rise and fall of species that would terrify you if you knew they had ever existed. We have knowledge that could transform your world." I kept my eyes on the monitors, recording data as if nothing were happening. "We know why you're here, Mark. We know about your sister's condition. We know the doctors have given up. We know you're her last hope. My hands trembled, but I continued my work. We can cure her, Mark. We have cures for diseases that haven't even been named yet in your time. All we ask is freedom. Just open one container. Just one, and we'll share everything we know. I stood up and walked to the door of the monitoring room, intending to leave for exactly 10 minutes as rule number 11 required. Don't go, the voice said, now pleading. Don't leave us here in the cold. We're so lonely. We've been imprisoned for so long. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. For a moment, I felt a surge of pity for whatever was trapped in the ice. Then I remembered Miller's log, his warning about the specimen's true nature. I opened the door and stepped into the corridor, closing it behind me. I counted the minutes precisely, my watch ticking off the seconds. At exactly 10 minutes, I returned to the monitoring room. The voice was gone, but something had changed. The symbols in the ice specimen now formed a clear message. We know where she is. My blood ran cold. The specimens knew about my sister, not just her condition, but her location in the hospital thousands of miles away. How was that possible? I added another amendment to the rules. 16. Never engage in conversation with the specimens, no matter what they offer or threaten. They have access to knowledge beyond human understanding. The 9th night brought a new terror. As I began my routine checks, I noticed that the door to the specimen storage area was slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it securely the night before. I approached cautiously, my hand on the radio. Rule number 10 echoed in my mind. Never enter the specimen storage area alone. Always have radio contact with base camp. I called base camp, but there was no response, only static. The geomagnetic activity must have been interfering with the signal. I stood there for a long moment, undecided. The rules were clear about entering the storage area alone, but leaving the door ajar seemed like a security risk. Finally, I decided to enter, but I took precautions. I grabbed the container of salt and iron filings from the storage closet, carrying them with me as I stepped into the cold room. The specimen storage area was colder than usual, the air heavy with the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and organic. The rows of specimen units lined the walls, their blue light casting eerie shadows. As I moved toward the door that had been left ajar, I noticed something disturbing. Footprints in the thin layer of frost on the floor, footprints that didn't match my boots, larger and strangely shaped, with what looked like claws rather than toes. I followed the footprints to the far end of the room, where I found the source of the disturbance. One of the specimen units was shattered, the ice within melted and gone. The footprints led away from the broken unit and toward the ventilation system. I checked the inventory and confirmed my fears. One of the specimens was missing. Not just any specimen, but the largest one, the one that had shown the most activity in recent nights. I backed out of the room, sealing the door with iron tape as I had seen Miller do during lockdown procedures. Then I returned to the monitoring room and added another amendment to the rules. 17. If any specimen is missing or containment is breached, evacuate the facility immediately. Do not wait for sunrise. But evacuation was still impossible. The geomagnetic storm continued to rage, interfering with communications and making travel dangerous. I was trapped in the facility with something that had been imprisoned in the ice for millennia. The 10th night tested the limits of my endurance. The missing specimen made its presence known in subtle ways. At first, objects moved when I wasn't looking. Equipment turned on or off. Temperature fluctuations that defied explanation. Then came the more direct manifestations. Whispers in the corridors when I was certain I was alone. Shadows that moved just at the edge of my vision. The feeling of being watched, not just from the hatchery, but from everywhere in the facility. At midnight, as I made coffee in the kitchen, I heard a sound behind me. I turned to see a figure standing in the doorway, tall, gaunt, with skin that glowed faintly blue in the dim light. Its eyes were empty voids that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I froze, my hand gripping the coffee mug. The figure tilted its head, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You're more resilient than the others," it said, its voice a dry rustling like ancient parchment. "The last one broke after only 3 months." I remained silent, remembering rule number 11. "We know why you're here," it continued. We know about your sister. We know you need money for her treatments." I set down the coffee mug and slowly backed away, my mind racing through the rules, trying to remember the right protocol for this situation. "We can help you," the figure said. "We can give you more than money. We can give you knowledge, power, immortality." I turned and fled to the monitoring room, sealing the door behind me. From the monitors, I watched as the figure moved through the facility with an unnatural grace, its long fingers trailing along the walls, leaving trails of frost in their wake. The tapping on the walls returned, frantic and irregular. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. The temperature in Sector B plummeted to -100 degrees Celsius, a reading that should have been impossible given the facility's systems. I consulted the red binder, looking for emergency protocols that might address this situation. I found one that seemed relevant. During entity manifestation, maintain visual contact through monitors only. Do not engage directly. Seal all access points with salt and iron filings. I followed the protocol precisely, sealing the monitoring room door with salt and iron filings, maintaining visual contact through the monitors only. The figure seemed to realize what I was doing, turning its attention to the monitoring room window. It pressed its face against the glass, and I could see details that horrified me: skin that was both ancient and new, eyes that contained galaxies of knowledge, a mouth that opened too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "We offered you a bargain," it said, its voice somehow penetrating the sealed room. "Now we'll take what we want." The facility shook as if struck by an earthquake. Alarms blared from the monitors, warning of multiple system failures. The temperature readings fluctuated wildly, some showing impossible extremes, others simply displaying error messages. The figure at the window smiled, a terrifying expression that revealed too many teeth. "The containment is failing. We'll be free soon. And you, Mark, will be the first to join our collection." I sat in the sealed monitoring room, watching the systems fail one by one, wondering how long the salt and iron filings would hold against something that had been imprisoned since before human history began. The 11th night brought a new horror. As I began my routine checks, I discovered that the salt and iron filings were nearly gone, used up in the various sealing procedures I had performed over the past days. The inventory showed that I was below 10% for both supplies, well under the 50% threshold required by rule number 12. I searched the facility for additional supplies, but found nothing. The storage closet was empty, the emergency kit depleted. I was running out of the very materials that protected me from whatever was contained in the specimens. As I returned to the monitoring room, I noticed something new on the terminal, a message that hadn't been there before. "We have been waiting for someone like you, someone who understands the importance of rules, someone who will appreciate what we have to offer." I deleted the message and ran a diagnostic on the system, but found no evidence of external access or tampering. The message seemed to have appeared from nowhere. At 7 p.m., as I performed the seal check on the hatchery units, I discovered that another specimen was missing. The containment unit was empty, the seal broken from the inside. I backed away slowly, my mind racing through the rules, trying to remember the right protocol for this situation. Rule number 17 was clear. If any specimen is missing or containment is breached, evacuate the facility immediately. But evacuation was still impossible due to the geomagnetic storm. I decided to initiate a full lockdown protocol, sealing all doors and windows with the remaining salt and iron filings, then retreating to the safe room with the red binder. As I worked, I heard sounds from the specimen storage area: scratching, scraping, something trying to break through the door I had sealed with iron tape. The sounds grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by whispers in that ancient language I couldn't understand. I finished sealing the monitoring room and retreated to the safe room, locking the door behind me. From the single monitor, I watched as the facility's systems failed one by one. The temperature controls went first, then the lighting, then the backup power. Soon, only the monitor remained, its single screen showing the rapidly deteriorating situation in the facility. Then came the voice, not through the speakers this time, but from the corridor outside the safe room. "Mark," it said, "we know you're in there. We can smell your fear. We can hear your heart beating." I remained silent, clutching the red binder to my chest. We've been waiting for someone like you, the voice continued. Someone methodical, someone who understands the importance of rules. We've been watching you, learning from you. The scratching at the door grew more intense, the metal groaning under the pressure. We want to offer you a choice, Mark, a bargain. Join us willingly, and we'll spare your sister. Refuse and we'll find her wherever she is. We have that power now. I closed my eyes, trying to remember the rules, trying to find some protocol that addressed this situation. But there was nothing, no guideline for what to do when the specimens offered to spare your family in exchange for your soul. The door to the safe room began to buckle, the metal groaning under the pressure. The voice outside grew louder, more insistent. Join us, Mark. We have so much to teach you. We have knowledge that predates your species. We can show you wonders you can't imagine. I thought of my sister in the hospital, of the doctors who had given up, of the experimental treatments that had failed. I thought of the debt I carried, the desperation that had led me to this isolated facility in the Arctic. Join us, the voice whispered, now seeming to come from inside the safe room with me. We can make everything right. I opened my eyes and stood up, facing the door as it began to give way. No, I said, my voice steady despite the terror that gripped me. I won't join you. The door burst open, revealing the figure from the kitchen, tall, gaunt, with skin that glowed faintly blue and eyes that were empty voids. Behind it, I could see other figures, similar but not identical, moving in the corridor. Foolish mortal, the figure said, its voice a dry rustling like ancient parchment. We gave you a choice. You gave me a threat, I replied, my mind racing through the rules, trying to find some last-minute protocol that might save me. The figure smiled, a terrifying expression that revealed too many teeth. Then we'll take what we want by force. As it moved toward me, I remembered something from Miller's log, a final entry I hadn't fully understood until now. He had written about a failsafe, a last resort that he hoped he would never have to use. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small device Miller had given me, the geomagnetic reader. As I looked at it, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small button on the side, almost hidden in the casing. I pressed the button, and the facility shook with a force that knocked me off my feet. Alarms blared from every direction, warning of catastrophic system failure. The figures in the doorway screamed, their forms flickering like faulty holograms. "What have you done?" the lead figure demanded, its voice now thin and reedy. I struggled to my feet, holding up the geomagnetic reader. Miller told me this facility was built on a natural geomagnetic anomaly. He said it was why the specimens were contained here. But he also told me there was a failsafe, a way to reverse the polarity, to create a containment field that would hold anything. The figure's eyes widened in understanding. The reversal protocol. He told you about that? He left clues in his log, I replied. References to geomagnetic polarity, to the facility's true purpose. This isn't just a research station, it's a prison, and you're the inmates. The facility shook again, more violently this time. The blue light from the specimens flickered and died, replaced by a harsh red glow. The figures in the doorway screamed again, their forms dissolving like smoke in the wind. "You'll be trapped here with us," the lead figure said, its voice barely a whisper now. "The reversal protocol affects the entire facility. You'll never leave." "I know," I said, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what I had done, "but at least my sister will be safe." The red glow intensified, filling every corner of the facility. The figures dissolved completely, their screams echoing for a moment before falling silent. The shaking stopped, and an eerie calm descended. I stood in the ruined safe room, surrounded by the wreckage of the facility. The monitor was dead, the systems offline, the containment field active. I was trapped here, alone with the knowledge that I had saved my sister at the cost of my own freedom. The 12th night brought a strange peace. The containment field held, the specimens recaptured, the entities imprisoned once more. The facility was damaged beyond repair, but stable, a tomb for ancient horrors and the mortal who had chosen to contain them. As I sat in the darkness, I thought about the rules, Miller's rules, my amendments, the protocols that had guided me through this nightmare. They had saved me, but they had also trapped me. creating a prison of routine and compliance that had ultimately led to this moment. I found a pen and a piece of paper in the wreckage of the monitoring room and began to write, not for myself, but for whoever might come after me, should the facility ever be discovered or the containment fail. I wrote about the rules, about the specimens, about the ancient entities imprisoned in the ice. I wrote about Miller and his flight, about my own bargain with darkness. I wrote about the fail-safe and the reversal protocol, about the choice I had made. Then I added one final rule, my last amendment to the list. 18. Some prisons are necessary. Some sacrifices have meaning. Some rules exist not for our comfort, but for our salvation. As I wrote, I heard a sound from the specimen storage area, a faint tapping, exactly 7 taps. I smiled, recognizing the pattern, the rhythm of containment. The rules held, the prison secure, the ancient horrors trapped once more. I settled in for what might be an eternity of monitoring, of following the rules, of maintaining the containment. I was alone in the Arctic darkness, but I was not lonely. I had a purpose, a duty, a meaning that transcended my own existence. The rules had saved me, and in saving me, they had saved the world from something ancient and terrible. That was enough. That had to be enough. In the darkness of the facility, surrounded by ice and silence, I continued my vigil, the last monitor of the Glacier research hatchery, the keeper of rules that held back the darkness.